Welcome to another video from Indzara.com. In the previous video, we talked about the 5 key factors in the PTO policy for hourly employees. In this video, we will learn how to calculate the PTO balance for hourly employees. I am working on a free Excel template that will calculate the PTO balance for hourly employees, which you can download and put in your own information and calculate the PTO balances automatically. If you're interested in receiving that, please subscribe to this channel, and also please post your interest in the comment section below. Now let's get started. So here is our example employee, and here's the details on the settings related to the PTO balance calculation. So let's say the employee works 8 hours every weekday, and then the hire date is 3rd July 2019. There is a probationary period of 90 days. The rollover limit has been set as 10 hours. It applies to the calendar year. And the maximum PTO balance at any point cannot go beyond 30 hours. Employee takes some PTO on specific days. The accrual rate policy is that the employee will earn 1 hour of PTO for 40 hours worked until he or she reaches 9 months of tenure, and then after 9 months, 2 hours per 40 hours worked. Now with these details, let's see how the key factors of a PTO policy are implemented and also how the balance is calculated. First is the probationary period. So as I mentioned, the employee has a 90-day probationary period in this example. So the employee completes that 90 days on September 30th, 2019, which means that the employee becomes eligible from October 1st, which is 90 days after the hire date. That means the first 90 days, the employee's work will not actually be used for PTO balance calculations. So the work does not yield any PTO accrual. What you see here on the calendar is how many hours the employee worked every day. You can see that there is nothing shown on the first 90 days. Even though the employee did actually work, the employee will get paid for the work. However, that work will not yield any PTO accrual. And hence, we only start calculating the number of hours worked by the employee from October 1st, which is what we're calling as eligible for PTO from that date. So October 1st is when it begins. So this is how the probationary period gets implemented in the calculations. Next is the accrual timing or the period. And this calendar now shows how many hours of PTO did the employee earn, or how much did the balance change every period. And you can see that the accruals happen beginning on October 1st. That's the first accrual date, because in this example, it's every Friday. It's a weekly accrual every Friday. So we have the first one on October 4th, and then October 11th, 18th, 25th, and so on. In the following slides, we will cover how did we arrive at these values. For now, what we are noticing is what is the timing of these accrual, and you can see that they are 1 week apart. Now let's go into the calculation of the accruals. Let's take the first week. Accrual date is October 4th. The employee has worked 32 hours during that week from October 1st to 4th, 8 hours a day. So 32 hours of work has been done. The employee has not taken any PTO. Now we calculate 3 things every period. So the first one is how much new PTO did the employee accrue in this period, and that's 0. And that's 0 because of this formula. So the formula for PTO accrued in the period is nothing but the total hours worked in the period plus any unaccrued work hours from the previous period. Apply the accrual rate to that. So in this example, because this is the first week of accrual, we have the work hours worked in this period is 32. There's nothing unaccrued from the previous, so that's 0. And then we are ending up with 32 hours total times the accrual rate. Accrual rate is 1 hour of PTO per 40 hours worked. But the employee has not worked 40 hours yet. That means the employee will not get anything accrued. It's 0. But what happens to the 32 hours the employee worked this week? That gets put into this bucket called unaccrued work hours. So that is something that we will keep tracking every week. So 32 hours have been put in the unaccrued, and the employee has not accrued yet anything. So the balance at the end of the period is nothing but the previous balance, the previous period balance, plus PTO accrued in the period minus PTO used in the period. So since there is no balance from the previous period, that's 0. Did the employee accrue any PTO in this period? No. Was any PTO used? No. And hence the balance remains 0. Now let's go to the second week. In the second week, the employee works for 40 hours, did not take any PTO. Now, what happens to the PTO accrued? Let's apply the same formula. How many hours did the employee work? 40. Did we have any previous unaccrued work hours from the previous? Yes, we had 32. So we add them to make it 72 hours of work, and we apply the accrual rate, which is nothing but 1 hour PTO per 40 hours worked. So now what happens is there is a 1 hour PTO accrued, plus the remaining 32 still goes to the unaccrued. So that is how we come up with 1 hour of PTO accrued, and the unaccrued still remains 32. And what happens to the balance in this case? So the balance will be the previous balance, which is 0, plus what is earned in this, which is 1, and then anything used? No. So it becomes 1. Now the employee has accumulated 1 hour of PTO in its balance. Let's go to week 3. Let's assume that the employee works only for 8 hours because the employee was not asked to work for more than 8 hours, because the work can be varying week by week, and maybe in this case the employee was not needed to work for more than 8. The employee worked for 8, and hence and there was no PTO taken. Now what happens to the PTO accrued? The formula is the same. We take the 8 hours of work for this period plus 32, which was unaccrued previously, and now we get 40. 40 hours means 1 hour of PTO, and the unaccrued becomes 0 because there's nothing more than 40 totally. And so we put 0 here, we put 1 here, and then the balance calculation is nothing but 1 from the previous day plus what was accrued this period, which is 1, no PTO used, becomes 2 hours. So we arrive at 2 hour balance. Now let's go to the next week. Let's say in this week, the employee worked for 39 hours and used 1 hour as PTO. So overall, something to keep in mind here is that when an employee is taking a PTO for 1 hour, the employee is still getting paid for that 1 hour because it's paid time off, PTO. So the employee is getting paid. However, that 1 hour should not be used to accrue more PTO. And hence, in a 40-hour week, if the employee worked for 39 and took a PTO for 1 hour, it's actually totally 40 hours that the employee is getting paid for, but only 39 will yield more PTO in the future. So that is why when somebody takes a PTO, it's important to note that this is how the calculation works. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. Number of hours worked in the period is 39, and unaccrued from the previous is 0. And so we end up with 0 new accruals, but we have 39 now waiting unaccrued. So 39 goes to this bucket and 0 is here. And so when we calculate the balance, we take the 2, we add nothing, we subtract the 1, and then we get to 1 hour of balance. So the balance went from 2 to 1 in this period because the employee took 1 hour of PTO. Now let's go to the last week for this illustration here. Next week, the employee worked a little bit more and worked for 41 hours, did not take any PTO. So now what happens is the 41 hours plus the 39 unaccrued from the previous period gets added. Now the employee has 80 hours of work, and that means the employee will earn 2 hours of PTO. So this is to illustrate that it doesn't have to be only 1 hour per every week period. In this case, the employee has 80 and now will earn 2 hours of PTO in this period, but the unaccrued will become 0 because there's nothing more than 80 hours. So finally, the PTO balance is nothing but 1 previously, 2 new, nothing used. So it ends up with 1 plus 2 minus 0 is 3 hours. So this is how the accrual rates work. Just to summarize all of this, in the 5 week period, total hours the employee worked is 160, Total PTO earned is 4, 1, 1, 2, 4, and then total PTO used is only 1 hour, and that means the balance left is 3. 4 minus 1 is 3. So this is how the accrual rates and the PTO balances work together. So the PTO balances are calculated using these formulas in a normal week. Now let's move to the next component, which is the rollover policy. So how does the rollover policy work? And let's continue with the same example employee, and the accrual date moves to December. Let's assume that at the end of December 27th, the employee has 30 unaccrued work hours and a balance of 11. So the rollover policy said that you can only carry over 10 hours. That means the 11-hour balance cannot be carried over to the next period. So what happens here is, let's talk about the PTO accrued in this period first. During rollovers, the unaccrued from the previous gets lost. This is how the templates from Indzara.com will handle it. If you have any suggestions or if you have any feedback on this, on how your organization does this, I am really eager to know. Please post your comments in the comment section below. The 30 hours from unaccrued from the previous will be lost, and only the hours worked in this period, so 40 hours, will get counted. 40 hours will yield 1 hour of PTO plus 0 unaccrued work hours, because there's only totally 40. If the employee has worked 41, then 1 hour will go into the unaccrued. So that's how the PTO accrual is calculated. Now the balance is, when we look at the balance, generally the formula will not have this rollover limit, but since this is a rollover window, now it is considered. And I missed one point. The why is January 3rd window is the rollover window, and that's because we had talked about the rollover policy being applied at the year end. That means January 1st is when the rollover policy or rollover window is in effect. And hence January 3rd is the first accrual date in the new year, and that's why this becomes the window where the rollover policy is implemented. So now here the formula is nothing but rollover limit is 10 hours, previous day balance is 11, so we take the 10 and 11 and then we take the minimum, which is 10, and then we add the 1 hour of PTO the employee accrued in this period, so it becomes 11. So what happens is, out of the 11 hours of the balance, only 10 got carried over because there's a limit. Let's say you have a 0 rollover policy. That means all the 11 will be lost. You will not carry over even 10. Everything will be lost. If you have a rollover policy which is unlimited, all the 11 will be carried over. Now let's talk about the accrual rate when it changes by tenure. So how does the calculation work in that case? So employee completes 9 months of tenure, and from April 3rd onwards, the employee should earn new rate, which is 2 hours of PTO for every 40 hours work. This is the tenure-based accrual rate to loyal employees. They will earn more PTO for the same amount of hours worked. So the April 3rd window, what happens is, previously the 40 hours of work was only yielding 1 PTO hour, but now from this period, it'll yield 2 hours of PTO. And so one thing to note here is that the new rate will apply to all the hours worked during this week. In this case, it's a weekly accrual, so it's weekly, but if you have a monthly, it's the month. So the new rate will apply to all the hours worked during the transition period, not prorated. So we don't look at specifically when the accrual rate changes. We apply that rate to the entire period. Once again, if in your organization you do it differently, I look forward to hearing from you. Please post your feedback in the comment section below. Now let's move on to the last part, the maximum PTO balance. So this is pretty straightforward. Let's assume that on April 24th, the balance is 30 hours. We know that the balance cannot go beyond 30. So what happens the next week if the employee does not take any PTO but works for 40 hours? This does not result in any new PTO accrual. Because we have set the PTO balance cannot go beyond 30, so the employee will not get any new PTO and will remain at 30. The balance will remain at 30. let's say the next week, the employee takes 2 hours of PTO, does not work any during that week, but uses 2 hours of PTO. That means the 30 balance will become 28. And then the following week, when the employee works for 40 hours, now the employee will earn PTO for that work. It comes back to 30. So the point here is that the PTO must be used in order for the employee to again start earning. Because once they hit the balance limit of 30 hours, they have to use the PTO in order to earn new PTO. So that wraps up the 5 important components of a PTO policy and how the calculations are done for the PTO balances using all these different flavors, all these inputs, how to calculate the PTO balance. So I hope that this example illustrated how the balances can be calculated. And I understand that these calculations can become very hard to implement when we try to do it. So when I tried to do this in Excel, it took me numerous hours to get everything right, accounting for various scenarios, various flavors, various combinations, and it took a lot of time for me to put that. But I have put in all the formulas, and then I've created an Excel template, which I will be sharing very soon, which you can download for free from Indzara.com and calculate the PTO balances for your hourly employee. And so if you're interested in getting that template and the video along with it, please subscribe to this channel and also post your feedback in the comment section below. And I look forward to talking to you soon in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.